We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
We grow when we give.
Nosotros crecemos cuando damos.
We grow when we give.
与えるとき成長する。
We grow when we give.
Welcome to R.O.G, Return on Generosity, a podcast celebrating generosity at work. Not financial giving, giving valuable time, alternative perspectives, and genuine collaboration. Our special guest today is Abby Havermann. With a combined 25 years of experience, first as a psychotherapist and adjunct professor at the graduate level, then as a financial advisor, and now a TEDx and corporate speaker, trainer, and coach, Abby guides leaders to remember their power and purpose. She draws on leading-edge neuroscience, ancient wisdom practices, personal and client experience, and a heavy dose of humor. It's one of the things I love about you. Some of the things that she helps people to do is to trade in stress, anxiety, and self-sabotage for grounded, gracious, and intuitive leadership. Yes, please. She is a former neurochange solutions consultant. She's a heart math certified instructor and a positive intelligence facilitator. What I appreciate most about you, Abby, is your kindness. From the way that you communicate with the masses on your podcast to how you connect one-on-one, I really appreciate just how kind, warm, and generous you are. Welcome to R.O.G.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you. I don't know that I see myself that way, but I appreciate that you do.
Yeah, well, you are, and you're amazing. I can't wait for our listeners to indulge in some of your thoughts and your experience. So why don't we start with your background? I always think it's helpful to ground our listeners in like, where did this person come from?
Yeah. I mean, I always say I sort of came into the world swinging. I mean, I really feel like I did, like even as like a child. I don't know if it was brought in with ancestral trauma or whatever, but I just was always kind of a little feisty and a little, it turned into what is now understood as being in my own way. But I really had a strong belief in like wanting to know what's really going on. And from a really young age, I think people in my family thought that I might be a psychotherapist because I was always talking about like really kind of deep stuff. I remember my middle school, my best friend from middle school, she told me recently, it shocked me. She's like, oh God, I remember being in class and you would just say these things. And she said, I would never say those things. She said, I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, I could never let someone know that about me. So I've sort of always been kind of out there and, just wanted to create spaces where people could just really be themselves and stop all the shame and the beating ourselves up and all the stuff that we're just so addicted to.
Oh my gosh, that's
Myself
incredible.
included.
Where were you raised? Like what part of were you born in the
on
United
the East
States?
Coast. I grew up in Boston, outside of Boston. Yep. And then I moved quite a bit. I moved right after college and across the country and back and forth and spent the last 30 or so years in Colorado. And about 3 years ago, we moved to Florida.
Excellent. Oh my gosh. Thank you for that. And so on your website and in your talks, you talk about your transformation story, like the thing that happened or the period of your life where it's just like everything changed. And you talked about how on the outside, everything seemed so perfect. And like, here's what else was going on. Would you mind sharing some of that with us?
Yeah. I mean, and I think that goes back to sort of even, goes back to that birth story. Like I always had this idea that I had to know more or know it all. Or my mother used to say that I would get frustrated when I didn't know how to read, but I hadn't been taught how to read yet. And so she would be like, why would you know that?
Right.
But I always sort of had this idea that I had to know more and be more. And when I became a psychotherapist, I was, obviously studying the unconscious. I went to Smith College School for Social Work, which was known for its clinical work, and studied all those theories. And I was in psychotherapy. I was in analysis. I was seeing clients. I had a full-time private practice. And I was really entrenched in the unconscious, and prided myself on that. But what I really was missing was that I well, I was missing a lot of things, but one of the things was that I didn't understand the neuroscience behind it, that you can only be so aware, and in fact, not very aware.
Mm.
And I really didn't realize how much my identity, or what I thought was my identity, was wrapped up in my success. You know, how good of a therapist I was, how much money I made, how many clients I had. And that really continued at my marriage, what it looked like, you know, all of those things, this picture I was trying to put on to the outside world, that most people bought, I think. And I even bought it, you know, but as I share in my TED Talk, you know, really one of the many awakenings came when my first marriage folded, and I had this, you know, really horrifically humiliating experience where I was a couples therapist, and I was arrested for domestic violence, and I had to spend the night in jail, and it was the most bone crushing, humiliating thing that had ever happened to me, because my whole identity was how good I was at this thing. And I always thought, like, but I like myself just fine. I have all of these, you know, things going for me. I really think I'm pretty okay. But what I really learned was that I really was suffering from feeling very unworthy and very unlovable. And that is what really drove a lot of my decisions in my life. So I don't know if that's the bone crushing humiliation you were referring to, but
Yeah. Well, I mean, you share a
that was
lot vulnerably. You know, you really put yourself out there, and you help us to see our own stories through hearing yours, and like identifying with some of those things, because like you said, it's not conscious. It's like not something you're doing on purpose. So I think for a lot of us, we don't even realize that we're leading a life to create a facade or to make an impression, and we don't realize the impact that that's having on us, because it doesn't necessarily match with like who we are and what we really want in our lives. So I appreciate that. I mean, yeah, that's a big one. That was a big transformation story.
Well, it
And
was. And sometimes we have to be hit over the head like that. And I do think it's really true. We have no idea like how, and I still, even now, I'm just so amazed when I catch myself in one of those automatic programs of like, oh, wait a minute, that thing you said, or that thing you did, or the thing that you want to go do has more to do with your fear that you're not enough just as you are, than, you know, something genuinely, you know.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So just to go back to that period of time, how did you get out of that? Like what got you through it?
So, I mean, there's a couple of ways that people change. You know, one way is when something so dramatic happens that you can't forget it. And you literally physiologically can say that something inside your body shifted. And that's what that was for me. It was so profound. I will never forget it. And I had this experience. I had 5 friends come visit me in jail that night, telling me where my son was, and, you know, all the things. And I just had this awakening that night where I was like, oh my God, I am loved. I am. I didn't need to get married for that. I didn't need to create a business for that. I didn't need, you know, all of these things. And so in that moment, you know, my worthiness issues, at least where it related to relationship, really went away, because I thought nobody deserves for this to happen. And if nobody deserves this, that means I don't deserve it. And if I don't deserve it, then I must be worthy.
Yeah.
And so out of that, I manifested, you know, my husband now. That was a massive transformation, but it's ongoing, right? I mean, and I think one of the things that's so difficult for people to handle and to believe is that, you know, these programs don't really go away. We don't get over them. You know, they are just parts of our inner world that we develop a different relationship with. So now I can feel maybe something come up. Maybe I can feel like, oh, I'm nervous to get on this podcast with Shannon, or, oh, you know, Shannon's in her podcast in the top 5%. Mine's only in the top 10%. You know, like maybe I can have that thought, but my relationship to it is really different. It's just like, oh, there's my mind. You know,
There it is. There's a thought.
There it goes, you
Yeah.
know, as opposed to knocking me off center.
And I know I've heard you talk about how important it is to stay curious. And that's what I'm hearing you say right now. It's that it's not that you don't have those thoughts anymore. It's just that you welcome them with curiosity, or you
don't
wonder, like, where did that
identify
come
with
from?
them. You don't identify with them. When we identify with things, I am this thought. I am this feeling. And that's how so many of us live, because that's what our mind says. And we are not our thoughts, and we are not our emotions,
Right.
and we aren't our behaviors. We're much more than that.
Yeah. How would you describe what we are?
We are a soul having a human experience.
Hmm.
We are one, and the difficulty I think that so many people have is they know that there's something inside that they know. There's some tiny little seed that knows something, but we're so bombarded with our human experience, that it's really hard to grasp onto it, to trust it, and to like grow it. And so one of the things that I feel like is really important to the practice that I do in my work is really, how do you manage being a human? Because we can't be in that spiritual love all the time. We can't, it's not realistic. We are also humans having a human experience. If someone cuts me off in traffic, and it scares me, or I'm in a pissy mood or whatever, we're going to react to that. And so then when you react to that, if you fancy yourself a spiritual person or a self-aware, evolved person, and you react to it, well, then you beat yourself up for reacting to it. And that's also part of the human experience. That's also what the mind does.
Yeah.
And so we have to, really get very, very good at observing what the mind does and get curious about, well, isn't that interesting? That I just lost my temper, or, made a fool of myself, or am in incredible fear about what this person thinks about me, or whatever.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I am a fool, or I really screwed up, or I am guilty of this.
So you're saying, like, separate it out. Don't make this your identity. Observe what's going on. Don't make it wrong either, right? To say, like, I shouldn't be upset about that. It's more like, I got upset about that. I wonder what that's all about.
Yeah, the way that you just said that is really perfect. When we say, I shouldn't be upset about that, this is how the majority of people will manage their emotional state. They will tell themselves with their mind, I shouldn't feel this way. And the mind is what's creating the problem to begin with. The mind is a judgment machine. Its job is to make meaning of whatever it is that we're doing. And so the mind has a very complicated filing system. It's good or bad. It's right or wrong. It's all or nothing. So the mind is saying, I did this wrong. And then the mind is saying, oh, you didn't do it wrong. Don't worry about it. It's fine. But that doesn't work, because you've done that and it doesn't take the feeling away. And you've probably also shared with a friend, just because the friend will say, it wasn't a big deal. I didn't see it that way at all. And don't beat yourself up, but you're still carrying it. You're still feeling it. And that's part of, the human experience. And so you have to be able to resist trying to have this conversation with your mind about your mind, and recognize that you're not your mind.
And that's where a lot of people go. Is that what you're saying from your experience? Like, we go into this like debate or conversation with our minds.
Yeah, with your mind. And it's, first of all, the feeling is being experienced in your body. It's not your mind. You feel shame in your gut. You feel anxiety in your chest. You have to plug into where in your body that feeling is and observe it, instead of trying to stop yourself from feeling a certain way by telling yourself you shouldn't feel that way.
Right.
Like, the mind is just not an authentic place to be.
Yeah, it serves us, but not in that way. Right.
Exactly.
It has a valuable purpose, but that's not the one. but we often use it in that way, because I think because we don't know any other way to do it. So what would be a practice or an awareness that you would recommend for us to pay attention to?
Well, so, being in the present moment, is bringing yourself into the present moment, is the only way to get around the mind, because the mind will talk about the past or the future, all based on its memories of your past and your future. The mind is a memory machine. So the only thoughts that are available to us are thoughts that are based on experiences that we have had and assumptions that we are going to make based on those experiences. So the assumptions are the future anticipations, but those are really also the past, because the only thing the mind has to use is what happened in the past to say, well, I know this will happen this way because it happened that way before, or regret or shame or, guilt about the past. So the mind can only think from memory from the past. The only thing where we're really, I want to say this appropriately, the only place to create change and to not be tied up in the mind, but to be more in our being part, is when we're in the present moment. The present moment is the only moment where the mind cannot fool us if we plug into it. So that can be anything from, I know you had Jeff and Brett on sharing heart math and breathing exercises, which is like amazing. The heart math stuff, I'm heart math certified as well. It's like bar none. But also, in positive intelligence, we talk about PQ reps, which could be something as simple as taking your 2 fingertips and rubbing them together with such attention that you can feel the ridges of your prints on your thumb and your finger. And you can do that while we're talking, right?
That's really cool.
You put all of your presence there. You can do that for 10 seconds. And once we bring our presence to something in the present, we've silenced the mind. So you can do it, there's all kinds of other ways. You can open your focus. Like sometimes when I'm going for a walk and my mind is like, and I'm getting frustrated that I can't control my mind, because that's also something that's very frustrating. We can't control our mind. I'll be like, okay, let me try and open my focus. And so I'll walk and I will try and focus on my peripheral vision. Or if I'm driving, my peripheral vision, like, let me just see what I can see. It instantly takes you out of your mind.
Out of your mind, because you have to focus on that thing in front of you right now. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I have heard it said that, paying attention to our 5 senses is a way to get into the present moment focus. But I've never heard it said that when you do that, then that's where you are not in your mind anymore. You're not focusing on the past or the future.
Well, yeah, what we really want to do is kind of not be flooded by our 5 senses. So that's why in meditation, we close our eyes. That takes out a whole bunch of distraction. If we get into a quiet space, now we don't, that's not good. If we put headphones on or listen to music, now whatever's happening out there can't distract us. If the temperature is appropriate, like when we're really trying to do a meditation or something, you really want to try and close down those senses. But a great hack is to take one of those senses, like the touch, and do that with your things, or focus on the furthest away sound you can hear, or the closest sound you can hear. But just, it's called really going to from a divergent focus where everything is happening to, a very, very specific focus.
So when you're talking about how our reference point is our experiences in the past, for those who have had very challenging pasts and feel like it's like a loop that keeps kind of showing up, what are some of the ways that you have worked with your clients and, yourself that help you to potentially rewrite the script or, clear the canvas and create something new? What are some of the ways that we can leave the past where it belongs?
Yeah, I think that one of the really important things that I work with with my clients and that people need to know is that we loop. That's what the mind does. It loops. And so growth is not linear. It's not like, well, I conquered that, now I'm done. It's that I peeled this layer of the onion. And now, so growth is more like this. It's like a spiral going upward. So where you might be in the basement floor feeling like the water is coming up and, you're drowning, but then eventually you get up to, the 3rd floor where you're looking down at this past and these traumas and whatever it is. And you're not having the same reaction. In the basement, you're panicking. all of your behavior is going to be based out of this real belief that this horrible thing is happening. But from the third floor, you're looking down and you're like, oh, well, there's not an emergency right now.
Mm-hmm.
Your brain and your body are think you're in an emergency, but you're not really.
Yeah.
So it goes back to kind of helping people be able to become aware and honest about what's really happening in your inner world, because we don't like to be honest about what's happening in our inner world.
Mm-hmm.
We even if we can identify, well, these hard things happen to us, but it's harder to identify, and I keep acting as though those hard things are still happening to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do I get out of this role that I've become accustomed to playing? And, for me, I work very directly with people. And I just hold a space that's safe enough so that people can begin to take on these parts of their personality that aren't serving them.
Mm.
And maybe that, and there's no judgment about all of it. That's the other thing. It's so important to really, there's no judgment. Like I have a huge, work that needs to be done on humility, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so, and, you could say, oh, that's terrible. You're not a humble person or whatever. Right. But what I've noticed about my personality parts is that sometimes I'm either worthless or I think I'm all that in a bag of chips. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
how my parts work. I've got one part out that thinks, oh my God, you're doing great. Maybe maybe my podcast did something, or I helped somebody or whatever. I spoke on stage and I got a lot of whatever. And I'm like, this part's like, you are really pretty awesome. And then maybe something else happens and I'm like, oh, you're terrible.
Yeah.
That's really a horrible way to live,
Mm-hmm.
and I talk about that in my TEDx, that, our self-worth can fluctuate like the stock market.
Yeah.
If you get the gig, if you get the guy, you feel great. And if you lose the gig, if you, have a fight with your kid, you're crap.
Yep.
It's, we don't really realize that we're living that way. So it's really approaching all of this without any morality. Like, yeah, you know what? The mind's a crazy place. There's all kinds of personality parts that were grown out of our past.
Yeah.
Let's not judge any of them.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just watch them, get to know them, and love them.
Yeah. Accept
love
them.
love all of them.
So when you talk about personality parts, like how would one start to identify what those are? I'm thinking about our listeners and myself, even hearing you say this and wondering, like, what are mine and how do you discern what they are?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And there's thousands and thousands of them, right? So like we have patterns of behavior, right? One of the easiest ways to think about it, I like to think of, is like, I've got a part that wants to eat all the chocolate cake. And I also have a part that doesn't want to gain weight. So these parts are like at odds. And whichever part is out that day is the one that's going to win. So it can be anything from as simple as that to when I was talking, I have a group that we were talking in yesterday, and the women were really, everybody was really beginning to identify their victim part. So how do you, and nobody wants to think they're a victim. Nobody thinks they're a victim, right? But if you really start watching your parts, right? And someone was sharing about how they walked into the kitchen and their husband was making lunch and he didn't have anything out for her. And her thought was, oh, well, I guess I'll just make my own lunch. Well, that's a victim thought, right?
Yeah.
Like I have thoughts like that all the time. I joke about it because I always poke my husband. He's met all these friends here. He's always out with his buddies. And so I'm always like, oh, I guess I'm, chopped liver, and it's a joke, but there's a hint. I've got a part inside me that, just wants to be loved, wants to be the only one, wants all those things. And so I'm aware of that part, right? So you might have a victim part. You might have a self-important part. You might have a guilty part. You might have, basically any of the emotions that you're experiencing, or repetitive thoughts that you have. Those are parts of your inner world. Because if you're a soul living a human experience, a soul does not have parts. A soul is one. There's only wholeness. There's only oneness.
There's only enoughness.
There's only enoughness. That's all there is. Love is
Yeah.
just one whole,
Mm-hmm.
right? Anything less than that is divisive. And so that gets into a whole conversation about, morality and all these things. But yeah, so really anything could be a part. So what do you think about, like, if you think about like a part that might be a part of your inner world that gets in your way, or maybe doesn't get in your way. Maybe it's a really useful part, right? Like I've got a
Right.
part that jumps out of bed every morning and starts to meditate,
Right. Right. And I think that that's a helpful thing to think that we all have different parts, because I think that part of me thinks that we all have very similar parts, like that, when I'm like longing for that chocolate cake, but then I also want to, care about my health. Like, I think, doesn't everybody think like that? But maybe not, like, I think like you're opening up awareness to say, like, it's not right or wrong. It's just very expected that we have these parts because we're human and we have all these different experiences. So some of that might register for us because we just have experience with that, or maybe we have shame about that, or we've made bad choices, or good ones, right? So I just think it's what I'm hearing you say is, how do we transition from this like parts and judgment and shame and all that to that oneness, the being the more of the soul? Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, I think, and that's a huge leap that none of us will ever do in this lifetime.
Oh, okay. So this is
This is
aspirational only.
it's aspirational, but we can live with a lot more. We can reach our potential and live with purpose and live with calm and be more prouder of who we are and get right on the right path and more intuitively. The more we learn to simply observe these different parts of our inner world without reacting to them. So if I do eat all the chocolate cake, right? Like I wake up in the morning, it's the first thing I think, oh, I ate it all.
I feel terrible.
I feel terrible, right? That's a judgment. That's a judgment. So that judgment in and of itself is what's problematic more than eating the cake. That's the mind trying to say this would be right and this would be wrong, as opposed to, no, this just is. This is. And maybe you're able to say, I mean, this gets complicated, but you can have a larger aim, like, hey, I want to get in shape, and that part that wants to get in shape could step in front of the other part once you build it, that says, oh, wait a minute, I want that chocolate cake. But then all of a sudden you practice observing yourself over enough time. And all of a sudden this other part comes in, and just before you know it, the craving is gone, because that part has said, no, we have a larger aim and you're not going to get in my way today.
Right. Okay. I mean, that's really helpful. And to go into the direction of generosity, and to answer, you'd asked me the question, like, what are some things that I do, or, parts of myself. And I think that generosity is one of them. And it has both sides of the coin, where I genuinely love giving and making a contribution and feeling like what I'm doing is of service. And the other side of that coin is when I give so much that I don't give to myself, and then I'm exhausted and resentful that I have other things that are going to require my time and attention. So I think like just generosity as a topic is one, at least for me, that I think I could see the whole spectrum.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a great example, right? Like, and that real, and getting to understand when you're being generous in that moment, what is behind it, right? Like when you really get to understand yourself. A lot of people who struggle with people pleasing, this is outside of generosity, maybe not the same thing, but they struggle with people pleasing, and they think, their mind tells them that they're just givers. They just give all the time. And it's true. They are at their base, at their authentic, at that quality in themselves is truly that they are a giver. But when they get under stress, what happens is they're people pleasing because they feel anxious if someone is upset with them, or they feel anxious when someone is upset in general, and they think they have to solve it. Now, the question could be asked, is that generosity then? No, that's different. That's something else. That's self-calming.
Right. Yeah.
So, So I would think I was saying to you before in the form that you had me fill out, like generosity to me, it's not that some people are generous and some people aren't. To me, I believe that at our soul state, we're all generous beings. We all are, but we get into stress.
Yeah.
And life happens and we get bombarded by our five senses, and our mind divides everything into good and bad, and all that stuff happens, and all of a sudden we're knocked out of generosity.
Mm-hmm.
And we, without even knowing it, we're doing it for the wrong reasons. And that's when resentment comes in.
Yeah. So true. And so you were talking about in your prep form, I love how you said about how when we're self-absorbed, like a way out is to do something of service. So it's very human for us to get into our own mind, to focus on our own needs. What have you found in your own experience, and how you counsel your clients to get out of that place where it's really all about us, and we're focused as the lead character and potentially maybe the only character in the show?
Yeah, it's so natural that when we're under, I mean, stress is it's a self-absorbed state, and it's normal that we're that way, because when you're fighting for your life, you have to be thinking about, am I going to be safe? And that's literally like what our body and brain goes into. So the easiest way to get out of that when we're ruminating about something that we're stressed about is to go be of service to someone else. And it can be the simplest thing. And again, it just goes back to putting your attention somewhere else, right? So if you're let's say you're stressed about something and there's a ton going on, but you come to your call and you say, I'm going to just give all of my attention to this person. Or let's say you're running errands, you're running in and out, your mind's going crazy, and you just stop and you say, I'm just going to really ask this cashier, how they're doing today. Or you think of someone who may really just need to get a phone call or a letter or whatever. As soon as we put our attention on someone else and make an intention to be of service or generous to someone else, it automatically takes us out of our stress.
What a great, useful way to get out of the grip of stress and our own self-absorption, for us to think about, even a small act. Like you said, you could just send a text to somebody, or you could greet a human that's in front of you, or anything like that. Like, it doesn't need to be this profound act of generosity and selflessness. It could be really just putting our attention on something or someone else.
Yeah. I mean, I think that would be a really great thing for us as a society to think about, instead of these like grand things of generosity, like, oh, that's a good person because they did this. And that's a self-absorbed person because they don't ever do things like that. What about like just the tiny, tiny things that we all do in our daily life to just try and bust out of this machine that is our mind, that we're all having to manage? And so sometimes for me, that's, I might be like texting on my phone or like this. And I have to stop and be like, recognize I'm all stressed out. And then, turn to my husband or my son and just be like, so how was your day? Like, how was your day? Because my mind has to be reminded that the world is not all about me and my day.
Right. Yes, what great resources you have there at home, right? And how do you see generosity with them? I mean, what would be an example of a situation recently where you witnessed generosity with your husband or your son?
Oh my gosh. It's different parts come out at different times. I was driving to the airport to go speak at a conference a few months ago, and I drove through the Sun Pass line. I didn't have to put any money in the thing or take a ticket because I realized that sticker was there. I didn't put it there. And my husband had put it there. And I went through this thing and I thought, oh my God, what a nice thing for him to do. He actually thought of this. Right. It wasn't his car. It wasn't, and he put it on my car. Like I would never do that. It would never occur to me. And all of a sudden I'm just madly in love. I'm just like, that is the most
head over heels.
That is the most thoughtful thing. And that's the part in me that was out in that moment, right? Well, then I probably came home and he bought all this food, and he always buys too much food. And the part of me that, is annoyed and doesn't like to waste food got all irritated. And even though he bought the food that I like the most, that's not the way my mind's looking at it, because that's not the part that's out. But those things are really generous. My son, one of the most generous things that he does that I never do is he will give me his last bite of chocolate. I would never do that. I would never do that. He knows it. And he literally is like, you can have the last bite. And I'm
I
like,
love you almost as much as chocolate.
yeah, almost as much. Yeah.
That's so cute.
To me, those are super, super generous.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And that you acknowledge them, and that you recognize it, you thank them, you reinforce it, you let them know that you noticed and how delightful it was for you to get to go through that we, in our area, it's called Easy Pass, like the Easy Pass lane. So that those are great examples. I love that. So for our listeners that are hearing this and saying, okay, so when I have this part of me that's showing up, or maybe even consistently, that doesn't serve me, I know it's not serving me. Maybe it's rooted in that fight or flight reaction, right? I get my back up about things, or I, avoid having difficult conversations or something like that. What advice would you give when we recognize that we're doing that? Because I think part of that, what you're talking about, is awareness. Just be aware of yourself. That's like the starting place. But then what?
Well, and awareness, everybody thinks they're aware, but they don't realize how not aware they really are, because we aren't. But yeah, I think the biggest part of it comes to, it's super simple, right? When, no matter what you're doing, you can ask yourself these simple questions like, what do I love about what I did? And if I have another opportunity, what will I do differently? I learned that from Dr. Joe Dispenza. He always would ask that when we were doing meditations. What do you love about what you did? And if you have another opportunity, and we know that you will, what will you do differently? So I always bring that. I was talking to a client about that, and her answer was, well, what I love about what I did was this, and what I don't like about what I did is this. And I said, that wasn't the question. As soon as you put what I don't like and what I wish I hadn't, you are in judgment of what you did, but you're just a human being. We're all human beings.
Right.
There's one is not better than another. So
that's another great.
The most important thing is that you become aware of the places that you are judging yourself. And when you do that, you will find it is absolutely constant. Even like one way that people will judge themselves a lot is, I've already done this work. I should know better. I shouldn't feel guilty. I shouldn't feel this way. That's a judgment in and of itself. So making things bad, your mind wanting to do that, it's just so important. It's like the most important thing, to just be with what is. And the only way you can get there is in the present moment, because if you are judging it, that means you are applying your memory from the past or your fear of the future to whatever it is. That means your mind is working, you're thinking. You have to stop thinking. And sometimes what would be helpful to do that is to get into the place in your body. Maybe it's a tightness in your chest. And you just start to observe that without any thoughts attached to it. Just like, oh, this is where that I'm experiencing this feeling right here. And this is where, I talk a lot about self-care. And, this has a lot to do with being truly resilient. What drains our energy is this incessant negative thoughts and emotions that we apply, that our mind applies to everything.
Right.
And so you can't go and get a massage and think you're going to feel better or rejuvenated if you're telling yourself you're horrible all day long. Oh, that wasn't very generous, or you're feeling resentful now, and that's not good. And you're depleting your energy.
Yeah. Right. So you have to be more in the moment and like forgive yourself for the wherever your mind went before, and then say, you know, what did I love about that? Which I think for a lot of people is a hard question to even ask themselves, right? There's like, I didn't love anything about that.
Yeah.
But it's like, you know, what did I love about that? And when I get the opportunity in the future, how will I show up, or how will I handle it? And I think that's like, you know, the Nelson Mandela quote that comes to my mind when I'm hearing you talk is, he said, I either win or I learn.
Yeah.
Right? It's
Yeah.
like one of the two.
Yes.
So it's not like I failed or I made this like a horrible mistake. It's more about learning and growing.
Well, and if you think about it, this is how I always get clients out of that place. And I got myself out of this place too when I get there, because if you think about it, if you are telling yourself you're the most horrible person because you did this X, Y, or Z, and you got to think about that. It's kind of self-important to think that, right? Because we're all human. We all do this kind of stuff. We all make mistakes. We all lose our tempers. We all screw up deals. We all say things we shouldn't. We all, right? And if we are literally badgering ourselves like, oh, I can't believe you did that. You're such an idiot. And that was the worst thing ever, or whatever. Like, what makes you so special? You're so special. You're the only one that doesn't make a mistake.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's what our mind tells us.
So are you ready for some rapid fire questions? I
think so.
didn't prep you for this at all.
We can edit it out if I don't do it well.
Okay. What's an example of a song that you love?
I love this song. It was just embarrassing. I sing this song in the shower to my husband.
Oh,
Can I Have This Dance for the Rest of My Life by Anne Murray.
Beautiful. So what sage advice have you been given? You've been through a lot of your own development. You've read so much. You've encountered incredible leaders and mentors. What's an example of the kind of sage advice that you know that it has affected how you live?
I mean, there's so much. What's coming to me is you can't jump over your knees.
Tell me more.
That's one that comes to me often, that, you know, I have this part of myself that's a hyperachiever, and I'm constantly wanting to go, do, be better. And I can't, and to know everything. Like, I want to already know everything. Like, and there's the part that feels like I should know everything.
Right.
I should answer all these questions perfectly. This interview should be a slam dunk, you know, whatever. And it's like, but you can only learn, you can only know what your soul has been up to this point.
Yeah.
Like what you've had the opportunity
that's like, it's common sense. It's fair, right? To know that, but we don't remember common sense, right? We don't think like, well, how could I have known that?
How could I have known that?
Right.
Like
I wasn't exposed to this before now.
Right. How
about what sage advice do you often give to others?
You're so much more than you realize. You're so much more than you realize. And if you would focus more on who you're being and less on what you're doing, you'll feel better.
Amen. What's one thing that you most easily delight in?
Ice cream.
What's your favorite flavor?
Peanut butter, Reese's. Yeah, that's my favorite flavor.
And then my last question is, what do you think is a key to living a great life?
I think it is being able to observe yourself and accept where you are when you're there. And to recognize that when you're judging other people or circumstances, it's because you judge yourself so harshly. And so really the key is to focus on your inner world much more than everything that's happening in your outer world.
So rich. Thank you. Thank you, Abby, for making time and for sharing your wisdom with us and giving us this encouragement. We so deeply appreciate you. Where can people find more about you?
Well, head over to the Intuition Incubator, which is my podcast, and my YouTube channel is The Conscious Edge. And that's where the Intuition Incubator is. And I can't wait to have you on it. So I hope you schedule soon.
Yes.
That is the best place to find me. You can also find me at abbyhavermann.com.
Okay.
All my stuff is there.
All the links will be in the show notes. Check out Abby and follow her. And just again, thank you so much for who you are and what you do.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thanks for listening to R.O.G. Return on Generosity podcast. Please help us grow by subscribing and reviewing us on your favorite podcast player. And for more information, visit bridgebetween.com. We grow when we give.
우리는 나누면서 성숙합니다.
We grow when we give.
On rayonne quand on donne.
We grow when we give.